Hello, everyone, and welcome to this high-level political forum on sustainable development 2022 informal debrief. This year's forum concluded last Friday with the adoption of the ministerial declaration. And we will hear more from our speakers on the outcome of this declaration. And I'm excited to be moderating this panel today, and thank you all for joining. And we will unpack the main messages of the forum, the topics that were discussed with our speakers. So my name is Eleonora Bonaccorsi. I'm a program officer at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and I'm also a member of the SDG Lab hosted at the United Nations office at Geneva. Today's briefing is organized by the SDG Lab, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and Cepei, in partnership with the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. We have a 1-hour program with 15 minutes Q&A. And I would like to invite all of you during the session today to ask your question for our panelists in the Q&A function. We today will be hearing indeed on the outcome of the HLPF, starting first by having an overview of the HLPF by numbers. And I would like to thank you very much, the DESA, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, for providing these numbers to us so that we could show in this meeting. So thank you very much for that. And then we will explore with our speakers the main themes, the outcome, and the ministerial declaration, among others. We will then hear from insights on the voluntary national review that were presented, 44 VNRs this year. And we will be then narrowing our focus on the voluntary local reviews as a mechanism that reinforce and strengthen these reports, and of course, advancing the SDGs. So to open our briefing, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Lynn Wagner. She's the Senior Director of the Tracking Progress and the Earth Negotiation Bulletin Director at IISD. The Earth Negotiation Bulletin is an independent reporting service that covers the United Nations development and environmental negotiations. I've been following the ENB turns 30 this year, and they've been covering all the HLPF forums and other negotiations. So a big congratulations to the ENB team for this great success. Also, as I was saying, the ENB has covered the HLPF, and I would like to thank all the my wonderful colleagues behind these reports, because they have helped me, and I'm sure many others, in navigating these important discussions. So thank you for that. And with this, I would like to invite Lynn for her remarks, and she will present the main findings and observation of this year's forum. Thank you, Lynn. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us. I want to go over the HLPF by the numbers, which is the next slide. There we go. So HLPF is always 8 days. That's what it was mandated to be. This year there were 5 SDGs focused on. The goals were education, SDG 4, SDG 5, gender, SDG 14, the ocean, SDG 15, biodiversity, with this year really focused more on forests, and then SDG 17 on partnerships. There were 190 plus speakers during town hall meetings, panels, fireside chats, high-level segments. If you were there, if you were watching, you saw there were a whole lot of people on the agenda. And the way they managed that is they cut off the mic after 3 minutes for most of the speakers. And so that really focused the speakers' thoughts, or some unfortunately didn't get to their main point, but they managed to pack in a really full agenda. There were almost 300 side events. I know there were a lot of online side events, in-person side events, exhibitions, special events. The speakers included prime ministers, ministers, vice ministers, a head of state, some former heads of state, and one royal family member. That was I think, the Princess of Jordan, I think it was. There were 19 VNR labs where they really have a chance to dig into elements of voluntary national reviews, which are kind of a key focus of the HLPFs. And 44 countries presented voluntary national reviews, which is remarkable. That there's such an interest in doing these voluntary national reviews. So next slide, please. Just wanted to give you an overview of the HLPF, having just come out of listening to all the official segments. And then my colleagues Fernando and Javier will dig into VNRs and VLRs in particular. So the HLPF this year took place mostly in person. It was also online. And we're in the middle of multiple crises. The climate crisis, the pandemic hasn't ended. The conflict in Ukraine has created new related crises in addition to the war itself. There are knock-on effects for the global economy, food and energy security, and these crises and related and kind of knock-on effects were playing out in the newspapers every day during the HLPF. There were heat waves all over the world, fires because of it. There were 3 governments fell during the HLPF due to the more national circumstances, but also just reflecting that there is this uncertainty in the world. And on top of that, there's been significant rollbacks in women's rights in the US, playing out in the newspaper each day during the HLPF as we're discussing gender, the gender goal. So it was quite a time to be discussing the SDG framework, which we know it offers us this systems approach where we can see that everything is related and how different things come together and how we need to keep a really big perspective on what we're doing and be sure that we are taking into account the economic and the environmental and the social effects of everything that we do. And so what was happening around the world really confirmed for everyone at the HLPF that the SDG framework is the reflection of what we need to be doing. The SDGs in focus, the discussion really was quite sobering. A lot of the setbacks that for the last 2 years we've been telling ourselves are due to the global pandemic, revealed to be not really just because of the global pandemic, that there are some setbacks that we are responsible for, and not just that have happened because the pandemic affected poverty and health and education, that there are some things that that might have happened even without the pandemic happening. The education discussion, a lot focused on what's going to happen in September. The Secretary General is going to be hosting a Transforming Education Summit, talking about all the challenges to education and how do we put some more energy into this and reset where we're going on education. Gender, I'll get to that when we get to the ministerial declaration, but that discussion was probably the most sobering of the discussions. Lots of setbacks, lots of roadblocks to progress there. The discussion of the ocean was possibly the most hopeful. Delegates had just come from the UN Ocean Conference where a lot of commitments had just been made. There's some momentum to get progress on concluding negotiations on the BB&J negotiations, which is on biodiversity, marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The biodiversity and forest discussions showed not so much progress, I guess, kind of holding place, waiting for that Convention on Biological Diversity's Conference of the Parties, which has finally been set for this coming December to set the global biodiversity framework, which is responsible for a number of the targets under SDG 15. And then the discussion about partnerships showed a lot of disagreement about how to achieve the changes that we need, especially with regard to the global economic system. The VNRs, Javier will say more about that. From my perspective of watching VNRs at HLPF, I'd say this year there were fewer what we would call tourist videos. The videos that the countries came with really showed or complemented the presentations to a large extent on what is happening in the country and what needs to happen, much more so than, say, the first round of VNR videos that we used to see. And there were some really good examples presented, and delegates were saying that was one of the things that they were getting really out of the HLPF, is hearing the examples and thinking about what that might be, for their own country to take back home. And that's, I think, a really powerful part of what the HLPF is, because, thinking about how to get these 17 goals into the same policy and in, implementing them all at once is a really big challenge. So thinking about how other countries have achieved this, have, attempted to put this framework into action, can be a powerful way to build those new ideas and new policies in your own country. There was a discussion about the SDG Summit, and that is happening next September, not this coming September, September 2023. It's every 4 years. The HLPF meets under the auspices of the UNGA. So it meets at the highest level in September. And so the next time this happens, the SDG Summit will be in 2023. So there was a discussion where what they called the architects of the SDGs came together. So Paula Caballero, who's credited largely with the kind of the idea of getting the SDGs negotiated, the two chair people of the final year before the SDGs were adopted, David Donahue and Machario Kamau, Nikhil Seth, who was in charge of the DESA unit that oversaw the negotiations. They came together with some others to discuss what we should do with that SDG Summit. And one of the discussion points was the fact that we have right now so many summits going on. What are we doing? We're having the UN Ocean Conference just happened. The last year was the high-level dialogue on energy. Next September, this coming September, it's going to be the Transforming Energy Summit. What are we doing with these summits? How do we ensure that these commitments happen? Next, in September 2023, there's the SDG Summit is supposed to happen, as well as the Summit of the Future that the Secretary General has just called for. And there's a lot of confusion now if those are one and the same, if they're separate, what they should be. One of the takeaways from the discussion at HLPF was what Paula Caballero called for us to be disruptive. She reminded us that the SDGs were disruptive, and also that originally the plan for the SDGs wasn't clear from the start, and there was a negotiation track on the SDGs as well as a negotiation track on what would replace the MDGs. And so for a few months, these were two separate tracks, even though they were both, thinking, the organizers of both processes were thinking they were going to come up with this new global goal set for us all. And so she reminded us that people said it couldn't be done, but those two processes were brought together. And so we got one powerful goal set as a result. And so she was suggesting the same for this September 2023 process. But I think even more so, just remember that the SDGs are disruptive. And so how do we keep that going and not just settle in, accept them as, this disagreement on paper, but as a really powerful tool in disrupting what we're doing. Finally, for the ministerial declaration. So that's where these pictures are from. The ministerial declaration has 142 paragraphs. During the final adoption of the ministerial declaration, one of the delegates noted that that was longer than the 2030 agenda itself, and said that should not be a precedent. That it was a very long document. So this ministerial declaration it's always been negotiated kind of off to the side. It's negotiated by the UN missions in New York. The negotiations start long before the HLPF, and they take place outside the limelight of the HLPF itself. But then the declaration is brought to the floor on the final night. As has been the case in the past, there was a paragraph that was problematic. It referred to the self-determination of peoples living under colonial and foreign occupation. And that text is very important, but it's an issue that has a bigger kind of political history and purpose than just this ministerial declaration. And so it's the US, Israel, and Canada opposed it. The others, there was a large group, I think 42 countries abstained on the vote. Other countries, the rest of the countries adopted it. As you can see from that top picture, there was this vote on that paragraph. In the end, the paragraph was accepted and the whole declaration was accepted. So the SDG framework doesn't really require this annual updating, negotiation, but still the ministerial declaration shows us where governments think an extra push it could be beneficial to get the international community moving in the same direction on the SDGs. And if you look at the final statements after the ministerial declaration was adopted, you can really see where the international community was struggling in where this extra push needed to be. As I said, the room was packed because there was going to be this vote. So it was clear that governments were watching the HLPF. The statements after the ministerial declaration was adopted, I think are quite telling. There was a large coalition of countries Canada spoke for them in support of the text on gender equality, which the spokesperson said was really important for that group, and that they said the negotiations on that text was really challenging, and they regretted that it was so challenging. Others in their statements showed why it was challenging. There were a lot of speakers who objected to the text on reproductive rights, and that's kind of a long-standing issue, but it is pointing out an issue where we still have clearly a lot of work to be done. So that concludes my overview. I see Eleonora is here to help me wrap up, and I look forward to digging into the VNRs and VLRs. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for this comprehensive overview on the outcome of the HLPF. Also, EMB published daily reports of this discussion happening in the last 2 weeks. So my colleagues have dropped the link in the chat, and just today, this morning, the summary of the HLPF was published. So you can read more and find out more about this the outcome of this forum in these reports. So now I would like to introduce you to Javier. Yes, Javier Surasky is a program officer on governance and financing for sustainable development at Cepei. He has been working and analyzing many voluntary national reviews in the past years, especially focusing on Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm pleased to give the floor to Javier. He will now brief us on the main messages and themes of this voluntary national review, 44 VNRs that were presented at this HLPF. Javier, you have the floor.
Thank you, Eleonora. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And I want to thank all participants for being here today to start discussing these HLPF results. As we reach the midterm to implement the SDGs, and considering that the second HLPF summit will gather in 2023, being aware of the HLPF strengths and weaknesses is critical for our chance to accelerate the SDGs implementation. Even though there are many issues we could analyze, considering the available time, I will focus my presentation on briefly answering the question of what the 2022 HLPF tells us about the VNR's process evolution. Considering that the 2030 Agenda National Implementation Progress Reporting is a voluntary exercise, the fact that after the 2022 HLPF, only 7 countries have not submitted at last one VNR yet is a major success. However, a quick reading of the 2022 VNRs shows us a persistent problem. Despite second and subsequent VNR submissions being the new normal, countries are still presenting reports anchored in a first VNR logic, which means focusing on national situations regarding SDGs implementation instead of explaining the process followed by the reporting country between VNRs to implement the SDGs. What policies were implemented and how did they help to advance the SDGs? What lessons have they learned? How did previous experiences in preparing VNRs help to build improved second or subsequent VNRs? Were the previous VNRs identified next steps implemented? No answer to these questions makes it impossible to follow the evolution of countries' path towards sustainable development. Lack of data and a persistent reluctance of governments to use non-official data contribute to VNR's information black holes. In parallel, it is yet hard to know how stakeholders' contributions were included in the VNRs. In many cases, stakeholders' engagement still looks like a checked sign in a must-do list for the VNR building. There is another obvious issue that is worth it considering. Reporting countries' data availability, human and technical capabilities, and financial resources dedicated to building VNRs reflect national resources availability as a whole. In an extremely unequal world, it results in a reporting capabilities gap that would be urgently closed to avoid the risk of leaving countries and the entire population behind. Even more distressing, a first approach to the 2022 VNRs shows that countries did not understand they should report on all 17 SDGs and not only on the goals under thematic review. Thus, we do not have only a time-restricted picture of the SDGs implementation coming from the VNRs, but an incomplete one. To be crystal clear, we are reading low-quality VNRs. And it is urgent to change the VNR's approach from a situational to a procedural report exercise, building a real reporting cycle instead of the current almost useless, disjointed, and fragmented photography exhibition of progress. So next slide, please. The 2022 VNRs, however, consolidate a trend ignited in 2020 and reinforced in 2021. The acute climate change related urgencies are so pressing that the issue became an SDGs implementation reference point, helping to bubble up interlinkages between goals and targets. To connect the dots behind climate change and highlight the SDGs interdependence is still a challenge, but the reality is imposing on us the need of carrying out that job because providing solutions to current sustainable development challenges are requiring more integrated and systematic effort, and those efforts would be at the core of the VNR's reporting. For example, to finally overcome the COVID-19 pandemic, still a major issue in the 2022 VNRs, we need to understand what failed in preventing and responding to the virus spreading. We need to learn from our good and bad practices, and we need to look to COVID-19 future impacts in multiple fields to be prepared to face them. VNRs then should be forward-looking, and we should share our lessons learned with others because there is no individual way out of the pandemic. Will countries understand that? Will they find a way to improve interlinkages reporting? I do not have a concrete answer to that question, but the 2022 VNRs shows us that we still have a long way to go. So let me close my presentation with some words related to the HLPF 2022 Ministerial Declaration adopted, as you know, as a result of a strict consensus following a vote on paragraphs 131, and whose adoption was followed by almost 30 states explaining why they decided to join the consensus, even they have deep disagreements with the final text. Even if in April 2022, during the HLPF Ministerial Declaration informal consultations, countries agreed in building a concise, focused, and action-oriented document, as Lynn had said, we have a ministerial declaration composed of 142 paragraphs. As a result, the HLPF 2022 Ministerial Declaration became a difficult jigsaw puzzle that only experts would put together. This way, the HLPF continues to stay away from we, the peoples, jeopardizing opportunities to accelerate the 2030 Agenda implementation in times when we need it more than ever before. And this leads me to my main conclusion. VNRs must improve their quality, and the HLPF itself must update its working methods and send clear messages to the international community. If countries do not find a way to increase the VNR's quality and agree on concrete and ambitious final declaration that provide concrete policy guidance, I'm afraid that unintentionally, the HLPF will contribute to leave the entire 20 agenda behind. I thank you for your attention and hope we can continue discussing on these issues in the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Javier, for highlighting the importance of voluntary national reviews, but of course, also mentioning the current challenges of VNR reporting. You mentioned indeed the lack of data, the meaningful stakeholder contribution to this report, and also many of these report gaps. You also mentioned the importance of making sure that there are interlinkages between all the SDGs and not just the SDG under thematic review, but also how to connect the dots between the different reportings. I think this gives me a very good segue to now introduce to the floor Fernando Ortiz Moya. He is policy researcher at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. Indeed, Javier, you mentioned that there is all these challenges that we are seeing how voluntary local reviews are filling these gaps of data challenges, but as well as stakeholder collaboration and including reporting gaps. So maybe Fernando, I'll give you the floor to you so that you can explain more how voluntary local reviews represent indeed this SDG accelerator to achieve the Agenda 2030. Thank you very much, Fernando. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's indeed, please let me thank everybody for being here today and also for the organizers for inviting me. It's really my pleasure to be able to be here today and talk about voluntary local reviews. So next slide. Yeah, so today I'm gonna be talking about the role of voluntary local reviews in accelerating SDG localization. Next slide. Next, please. Yeah, so just to provide, no, the previous one. Yeah, so just to provide an overview of my talk today, first I will be introducing what is a voluntary local review, which might be a new concept for some of our guests today. Then I will be questioning why voluntary local reviews and what is making them a powerful tool to localize the 2030 agenda. And finally, we will be discussing what are the frontier issues and what are the steps ahead for the voluntary local review movement. So next. So first, to begin with the definition of a VLR. So the 2030 agenda mandated encourage local governments to national governments to provide a voluntary assessment of the progress towards the SDG localization, which are presented every year on the 8th HLPF, High-Level Political Forum in New York, in the form of voluntary national reviews. But voluntary local reviews echoes this process at the local level, and it started as a bottom-up exercise spontaneously started by local governments in 2018, including some Japanese municipalities, Shimokawa, Kitakyushu, and Toyama, as well as New York City. to look at how their progress towards the SDGs, how they are localizing their strategies, how they're implementing policies to achieve the SDGs, as well as to monitor data. And this became this started without an official recognition from the UN system, without being officially recognized within the review and follow-up architecture of the 2030 agenda, but it has grown in importance. So next, please. And we can see here how the movement, these are the VLRs that we have been able to identify here at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies through our work on researching voluntary local reviews. So you can see how this has expanded all over the world, and it's been growing year after year. And there is already more than 100 local governments that has produced a VLR, and many of them more than once, including some local governments like Buenos Aires already has produced 4 VLRs in the past 4 years. Next. And this is just to show a quick of how the VLR movement act was last year. So this is all the VLRs presented in 2021. And you can see how, even though it was a very hard year, we know how the struggle from the pandemic was still continuing, and we were still trying to figure out how to go back to normal and to build back better while fighting with climate change. Nevertheless, despite all these issues, a growing number of local governments presented a VLR in 2021. Next slide. So it's very important to question why are local governments resorting to the VLR, and why there is a growing number of VLRs going and happening. So at first, VLRs started as a tool to report progress. So it was how cities were saying that this is where we are going. We are reviewing our policies. We have all this data. There are gaps in these elements that we are not being able still to implement, or we are going very well in SDGs 1, 3, and 5, but maybe we are not doing so well in SDGs 7 and 12. So each city was mostly focusing on reporting, but we have seen how later on it has been growing into a more tool for local governance. So cities are really taking into the VLR exercise to aid their own work and to really help to operationalize the 2030 agenda at the local level. So, for example, the VLR is it's helping to translate the SDGs, which are global goals, which were made mostly for national governments in mind, into the local level, and they are helping to create many mechanisms, from engaging with citizens and other stakeholders to aligning local policy with the SDGs, facilitating multi-level governance and helping to communicate between the local, the regional, and the national level, also helping policy integration and cross-departmental work. So the VLR is helping to all the different silos that are happening, that are part of the local administration, to talk to each other and to really find synergies and find ways to limit trade-offs between different policies. And it's also creating a monitoring and evaluation framework that helps to really see where the city or region is going, and how they can really accelerate their work towards the SDGs. Next. So in our work here at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, we have been looking into what are the main benefits of the VLR process. And after reviewing all the VLRs that has been, or most of the VLRs that have been published up until 2021, there are like 5 main benefits that stand out as being really the reason behind the uptake of the VLR as a tool to localize the 2030 agenda. So, for example, it really helps to kickstart sustainable development. So for cities that might not have, or cities or local regional government that might not have a still a well-established sustainable development strategies, the VLR provides a vehicle to start that work and to really start going forward and to get their work going. It also helps to make sense of the SDGs. So as you are aware, the SDGs are very complex. You have the 17 goals, but then you also have all the different targets and many different indicators to measure progress. So the VLR really can provide a framework to conduct a reflexive exercise to look into how these SDGs can work at the local level, and to also really help cities to work on the SDG localization. It is also help to engage with the stakeholders, and there is a number of VLRs that has revolved around helping to create these conversations between the local administration and other relevant stakeholders. And as you are aware, it's very important to reach out to all of society to leave no one behind and to make this work all collaboratively. It helps to bridge the gap between different levels of government. So there is a growing interest in how to link VNR and VLRs, as I will discuss later on, and also VLRs as a very powerful communication tools. So the VLR is helping cities to reach out to their citizens and to communicate their strategies and what they are doing to advance the 2030 agenda. Next. So contrary to the VNR, VLRs started spontaneously, and there were not official guidelines. There were not UN-made guidelines up until 2020, when the UN started creating this guideline. Other institutes and think tanks also started creating guidelines on how to conduct a VLR. So this has resulted in a wide array of cities and regions approaching the VLR process and creating different ways to implement this process. And we can see how there is not a single way to do a VLR, and many cities are trying to make the VLR work for them and making the VLR, taking the VLR as a vantage point from where to really think how to implement the SDGs at the local level. So we have identified this not an exhaustive taxonomy of VLRs, but kind of to really indicate where the VLR movement is going. So for example, you can see that they are aligning policies to the SDGs. So VLR is really helping to get the policies, local policies aligned with the SDGs, find gaps and really be able to address those gaps. Also to choose a desired future. So cities are using their VLR process to start thinking where they want to go in the future and how to build that future. As I mentioned before, engaging with society, also to monitor progress. So VLRs are becoming a tool for evidence-based policymaking, and it's helping cities to be aware of their starting point and be aware of their final goal and the steps they need to take. Also to set baselines, so to see where they're standing at a given moment and be aware of where is the starting point and where they want to go. And also it might be a difference also for storytelling, to tell the stories of sustainable development of their city and the strategies, and also the people behind those stories. So many of those intervention or policies might also be started from local stakeholders, and it's a way also to recognize the work of all of society in advancing the SDGs. Next. So this is just an example of one of the VLR cities, one of the first VLR local authorities, the small town of Shimokawa, Hokkaido, here in Japan, that used its 2018 VLR to launch a town-wide consultation process to shape their vision of the town towards 2030. And they transformed the 17 SDGs into the 7 Shimokawa goals. So the VLR helped to create this future of asking what they want Shimokawa to be in 2030 and create a framework to guide their policies in the 12 years ahead to achieve that goal. Next. So finally, in this year, in 2022 HLPF, there's been a a growing number of cities that has presented their VLR, including Toyota here in Japan, Tampere in Finland, Melbourne, Pereira, Bonn, and we can see how the VLR is really taking a prominent role within this debate. So when looking at frontiers issues and the steps ahead, there is something, the multi-level governance. It's still a topic that might need to get more elaborated, because since the VLR started as a bottom-up exercise, there is still not many examples of how to really operationalize this relationship between VNR and VLR. So there are some good practices like Sweden or Finland, but still it is a element that needs to be further considered. And also because there is a new tool called Voluntary subnational reviews, which is a local review that includes different municipalities together. So we can see how there are these voluntary national reviews, voluntary subnational reviews, and voluntary local reviews. And there is this need to really think how to operationalize this relationship and how this can work all together. Also, another issue is how to identify ways to translate the soft legacy of the VLR into more clear, tangible outcomes. So there is a growing number of VLRs of cities that are regional government that are presenting their second, third, or even fourth VLR. But also the question is what do you do after the VLR? Is just a tool to monitor progress, or it is a tool to help your policy making? So I think it's good to really think what happens after the VLR is launched, and what are local authorities doing with this information, and how they can really get their knowledge they're getting from the VLR to help to accelerate the localization by the 2030 agenda. And finally, there is a growing topic that is the peer learning between different cities, and helping to SD localization to meet the 2030 deadline. So seeing how different cities can really collaborate and help each other in this regard. So other emerging topics could be, for example, the synergies between climate change, biodiversity, and SDG localization. So this week there will be this third synergies conference here in Tokyo, in which is organized by UNDESA and UNFCCC, that will be thinking how both agendas the synergy that can happen between both agendas at the local level. So there are many topics that are still needing to be addressed, but nonetheless, I believe that the VLRs are really helping to accelerate the localization, because they are working at the local level, which is the level closer to the people, and it's really making a difference, and it's really helping overall achieving the SDGs. Next. So just to conclude, here at IGES, we have a website with selected VLRs and good practices and all other knowledge products that you are able to access if you want. And also, if you want, you can always feel free to drop me an email. So next. Yeah, so thank you very much. It was my pleasure, and I'm really happy to answer any questions you may have later on.
Thank you very much, Fernando, for this overview of the VLR movements. I think you raised an important point when introducing the VLRs as because the 2030 agenda, the 17 SDGs are it's a global agenda. It's quite broad, and it's interesting to see through your presentation how VLRs can indeed take these global goals and translate those into and adapt those into the local context. Also increasing policy coherence, communication between local stakeholders, and so on. So thank you very much for this comprehensive overview. There are many questions, and maybe so I can now open the floor for question and answers. Maybe since please go. Yes, thank you very much, Davide. So there is a question maybe to you, Fernando, since you are the last one, and this is about there is this question that you mentioned countries' reluctance to use unofficial data sources. However, one of the challenges that is always brought forward is the data collection as one of the key challenges, yes, for BNRs. So how do you think this vicious circle can be break? And also there is another one, sorry, just give me a second. Are the VLR making changes at the local level? How inclusive is the analytical and reporting process at local government level? So maybe those two for you, and then I'll introduce the others for the other speakers. Please, Fernando.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think the VLRs, it's always depends. So VLRs are a tool, so it depends how you use the tool. So there is a growing number of cities that are really using the VLR to make a change at the local level. So by creating ad hoc bodies to create this integration and communication between different departments, it's helping to make a difference. Also, other cities are using the VLR to look into their operation and find ways when they can do meaningful change. So, for example, there are some cases in which the VLR has been conducted to reassess how procurement is happening and for cities to kind of put their money where their ideas are going. So cities are really using their procurement also to align with companies that meet climate change agreements or are fostering gender equality within their organization. So the VLR, it's creating cities, this kind of tool for self-reflection that can help to advance and create meaningful change. And about data, I think that's an issue that probably is similar to the VNR. It's very challenging, and especially because many data sets are not disaggregated at the local level. So you can see checking VLRs that there is also this data inequality between different cities and between different countries. So I always say, like, when cities ask me, like, the best option is just do whatever you can with whatever you have. So don't be too obsessed of trying to gather data, because it's also a very expensive and time-consuming process. So, and at the same time, cities have a lot of data that usually it's scattered around all the different departments, and there is not this communication between the departments. So doing the VLR process also helps if the departments come together and work together, the VLR process really can help to get this data into one single place and create monitoring tools. So there is the Open SDG platform, which some cities like Los Angeles, Barcelona, or Helsinki has been using to create online platforms for reporting and monitoring, in which you can go and you have all the information for SDGs and all the data that they have available up to when available, and you can see how it's going. But if any local authority has not enough data, has problem gathering data, it's just try to make, because I don't think that should stop progress. And if your VLR maybe is not so heavy on data, you can do other elements and you can tell stories about progress, you can engage with the stakeholders. So there is always ways to act and ways to keep the thing going at local level.
Thank you very much, Fernando. And now I have a question for Javier. What has been the level of participation of civil society organization and local governments in the elaboration of the VNRs? Also, in addition to that, how do you find the cultural aspect of the SDGs is addressed in the HLPF, VNRs, and VLRs? Has the behavioral aspect of action or inaction been addressed as a culture of sustainability? Javier.
Thank you. And regarding the first question, I should say that there is no one unique answer. What we are seeing is huge difference considering different BNRs. Some are really integrating data, stakeholders, and a broad range of issues, while some others are, as I said in my presentation, seems to just consider the openness of VNRs as a little square on a check list of things to do. That means it becomes just a formal issue and no more than that. So I'm sorry, but my answer is no answer to your question. It requires a case-by-case basis. Regarding the second question linked to the cultural sphere of sustainable development, I should say that as you know, it's more or less ancient discussion. If we have to consider the cultural sphere as one of the not three but four spheres of sustainable development. Particularly, I'm sure that it should happen. I think that we can not get any sustainable development if we don't consider the cultural variable and its implication. But the truth is that there is almost no consideration of cultural issues in the VNRs, with some very few exceptions. And as I try to explain also in my presentation, what we are seeing is VNRs that present situations as pictures. I mean, as how the things are at a very particular moment in the country. And what we need are films. That means a process. I need to know, or we need to know, how things are evolving across time. And without this perspective of a continuous analysis, to develop good behavioral analysis becomes absolutely impossible. And that's why I think without logic, a change in the logic of BNR's building and drafting, it will be very difficult to include behavioral issues in the reporting process.
Thank you very much, Javier. The last question goes to Lynn. Two questions. So it was mentioned that the issue of climate justice was useful, the approach as a cross-cutting topic. Could you please give a concrete example as to how that played out at the HLPF? So the issue of climate justice as
Sorry,
a cross-cutting
could you say that?
topic. So how the issue of climate justice as a cross-cutting topic can indeed was, how did it played out at the HLPF?
I guess I know that it came up. I guess climate was underlying one of the underlying issues, but not an issue of particular focus during the HLPF. I think it came out, well, I guess one way, kind of a tangible way, was in the discussion of the, what is it, the multi-variable index of, or sorry, the vulnerability index that they were discussing in terms of using it for SIDS, in thinking about, instead of using GNI for providing assistance, looking at the vulnerability of SIDS and using that as a way to assess their ability to get assistance.
Yes, and Lynn, there is also another question. Yes, just give me a second. Oh, sorry. Do you think that with the new priorities emerging from COVID-19 and other issues, and with economic recession starting in all regions, the SDGs will still find a place in government's agenda? And maybe this is a question that for you all.
For all of us, it may be a nice ending point. I think, I mean, the SDGs, whether they're mentioned or not in government agendas, they are underlying what government should be doing for us. You know, government should be paying attention to the level of poverty in countries, should be paying attention to whether or not people are being fed, to, you know, innovation, to education. This is what government should be thinking about. How well they are recognizing the interlinkages in their policies is going to determine, I think, their success. And so whether or not they are using the SDG words is, you know, I mean, it would be great because that means that we know that they're really thinking about the systems approach and how everything fits together. But to get us out of these situations, these crises, this is the framework that really helps bring together and can bring success. I turn over to Javier.
Javier, Fernando, do you want to say a few words on this?
Yes, please. And I want to answer with another question. I think I know that it is not the best way to answer, but maybe it will help us to think together. So my answer is, do you think that we have world leaders that care about the future of the world, about the future generations, that are capable to put human life before economic interest? Depending on your answer to this question, you will find your own answer on the issue of how important the 2030 agenda will be in the coming years to overcome the actual crisis. I think that, to make it short, the question is, do you have now world leaders ready to face the actual challenges to the actual world? If yes, the Agenda 2030 will be high in the international agenda and in building responses. If not, so we will see the SDG fading away in the coming years.
Thank you very much, Javier. And I know we almost reached the final minutes of this webinar. So maybe David, if you can quickly put the slide. I just wanted to mention the upcoming SDGs event happening starting from September. So we have the Lynn already mentioned a few of those, and you can of course follow these updates on the SDG Knowledge Hub website. I won't go in through the details, but for instance, during Yunga, there will be this the Transforming Education Summit. Indeed, SDG 4 was mentioned as a critical accelerator for sustainable development during the HLPF. Then we have the SDG moment that was mentioned by Lynn. This is the third SDG moment since the Decade of Action was launched in 2020. So then we have the G20 in Indonesia, and it will be under the theme Recover Together, Recover Stronger, and hosted by the Indonesian presidency, and focus on global health architecture, sustainable energy transition, and digital transformations, topics that were also discussed during this forum. Then it's the in November. In November we have also the UN Climate Change Conference, also known as COP27, and it will be under the theme Uniting the World to Tackle Climate Change and Focus on Mitigation to Limit Global Warming. placing adaptation at the forefront and make significant progress on climate finance. We have the UN Biodiversity Conference that Lynn mentioned already in the presentation in Canada, and she mentioned indeed this new for biodiversity. And then we have the UN 2023, like going to 2023, we have the UN Water Conference. It will be indeed the conference for the midterm review of the Decade for Action on Water and for water. And then we have the SDG Summit 2023, which is the high-level political forum under the auspices of the United Nations General Assembly. So with that, we have reached the end of our presentation. So I thank you all very much for staying with us today, and of course also to our speakers today for unpacking these messages. You can connect with us through the website, and also you can follow indeed the upcoming events through the SDG Knowledge Hub. So I thank you all very much for today. Bye. Have a nice day.